You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
All right, hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. This month we are going to be chatting about whether or not the so-called subcategories of goth are valid or useful. We're going to be talking briefly about the future of horror and how it relates to technology as part of a crossover we're doing with the horroraddicts.net podcast. And then finally, we're going to be chatting with our guest about the future of goth and the past of goth and xenogoth and what the hell that is and what it all has to do with goth culture itself. So, as always, I am the Count, and I'm here with my co-host, Mark. Hello, Mark.
What's up?
And our guest this month is William Wellis of New Goth City. William, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on my first podcast ever.
Yes.
So thanks for having me.
We're always happy to pop any cherry we can get our hands on. So yeah, William, the way we like to start the show off is to get kind of a personal history of our guests so people can kind of see where you're coming from and hear your story and stuff. So if you don't mind telling us about a bit about when you were first introduced to goth and kind of your history with that, and then let us know about the really cool website that you run and your local scene a little bit if you want.
Introduced to goth is kind of a weird term, considering like I believe that it's always been kind of a state of mind and a state of being. But that's my whole philosophy that I have behind that, which we could get into if you'd like to. But
so you're one of those born goth.
Nah, I wouldn't say that. I'm not going to bring up like the debate of like, you know, like whether like gay is born or
right.
It's to each his own,
okay.
Really. I've always kind of been goth at heart, you know, being a little kid,
right.
Basically will always like gravitate towards Halloween, and every time some show like had something to do with like on TV had something to do with a scary situation or something, that was always the more fun for me. But it wasn't until like about 12 years ago that I really went into the goth scene pretty hardcore. At first, I kind of dabbled in it. I wasn't really sure of the scene. I was busy doing working in a film company. Long story short, I was in a bad relationship. A lot of work, my then fiance conned me out of thousands of dollars. Anyway, I was put in a really dark spot in my life. And then I decided, hey, I'm going to give the goth scene another try. I'm going to see what it's all about. And what happened is I found what I call a comfort in the darkness. Just sitting in a corner of a dark goth club, just listening to like just the music, knowing that like, I don't know, just feeling that vibe that I was trying to get rid of, like that, the depression, the loneliness, I was just at a dark place, and the scene really kind of embraced me, and again I found comfort within that darkness. It was like kind of like a comfortable quilt that surrounds you, and I got to know the people in the scene. They were really friendly, really opened up to me. Plus, it didn't hurt that I always wore black. So
always helps.
Yeah, always helps. So, and then after a while, after meeting a few promoters, I found that in New York City, there was a lack of an internet hub that people can go and find out where the next party or the next meeting was. The clubs were always strewn with flyers, and if you didn't show up at one club to pick up the flyer of where the party was happening next time, you were at a loss. You couldn't keep up. So I talked to several promoters, and I was making websites for my work anyway. And I figured, hey, why don't I just create a website? There were two websites that were still up and running, but they hadn't been updated in 4 years. So
that's usually what happens.
Right.
It's really ambitious. So people start it, and then they get busy with their lives, and they just kind of
So
away.
Exactly 10 years ago in September.
Oh wow, it's been 10 years.
It's been 10 years. that it was basically a New York based or tri-state area based.
Right.
New York, New Jersey, pretty much New York, New Jersey by state. It doesn't allow me to afford mansions or anything, but I do it as kind of like a payback to the scene. The scene really embraced me, and I had no friends. I was really, really at a bad spot. Suicidal thoughts, the whole 9 yards. Yeah. And this was a way to give back, actually, not to sound like some sort of weird PSA, but giving back to the community, and people really, really thanked me for it. They really went and used this as a tool. Now, it's not as sophisticated as having an app or something like that, but after 10 years, I decided to take my show on the road, and now we're doing it nationwide. I'm currently right now redesigning it from scratch, the entire website. And if you go to the website now at newgothcity.com, you'll see that at first there's a bunch of states listed, and not all the links are linked up yet because I'm building it as I go along. And I'm basically going state by state and finding out what's there to do. If there's sightseeing attractions, food, food, shopping, awesome. Bars, and then the events. I rely a lot on Facebook, and I rely a lot on the promoters to invite me through Facebook or send me emails to let me know what's going on, because I'm not omnipresent. Yeah. So that helps a lot, as using, I know you want to get into like the way technology can work with the local scenes, and it is supporting the local scenes. But what I want to do is I want to support the local scenes by bringing people from outside that scene. When, for example, if you go to, if tomorrow I'm in Colorado, let's say, I have to go to Colorado for something. And then in Colorado Springs, of all places, well, if there are other people that are like-minded, that are goth, well, where do they hang out? So like, for example, just to pull Colorado out of the air, like I have a friend in Colorado Springs. She has this bar called the Zodiac Bar, and they have goth scenes. Every Tuesday there's a goth night, and then there's a bunch of parties, and there's burlesque, and it's just a cool bar. So somebody who's from abroad or from out of state can be like, well, hey, the Zodiac Bar, that sounds pretty cool. Yeah, thank you, New Goth City, for letting me know that exists, other than just hanging out in your hotel. Especially, it works a lot with a lot of people don't know, and I get this when I go out to clubs and people recognize me and chat me up about New Goth City. It's actually even more effective abroad. I have a lot of viewers from, when people come from Germany or, Europe or whatever, and they have no clue about what's going on in Europe, in America. So when they would come to New York, New York, New Goth City, But now it's like, oh, wow, you have something that's going on in California. You have something in, in Idaho. And what I'm doing is along with them, I'm discovering all of these different nationwide scenes. And it's actually quite fun. I'm learning a lot. It's really... I'm not physically there, but through the internet, I'm meeting a ton of people. It's really a lot of fun, and I'm creating this network of this tightly knit network of different individual local goth scenes that then is statewide and then nationwide, and it's working very well. I'm almost going to start getting overwhelmed, so I might have to start hiring people to help keep up, which is not a bad thing. Yeah.
It's kind of funny. I do see people coming from Germany and a few other places in the UK and posting on Facebook to try and ask their friends where they're going, what's going on, all that kind of thing, figure that out. I've had a few people message me and say, hey, I'm visiting my friend in Minnesota. Can you drive over and hang out? I'm like, well, that's like 10 hours away, but
people underestimate the size of this country.
Yeah. But no, I love the ethos of that you mentioned, and I don't know if that would be reciprocal altruism, but just in general, the way that goths see the community and wanting to participate in it, wanting to put most of these projects and promoters, and there's some careers, I guess, that you could make a living on, but most of this stuff is a passion project, and it's just people wanting to contribute and give back to, like you were saying with your kind of beautiful introduction and feeling at home, wanting to give back to that and to foster that kind of environment so that other people can have that same experience. So I applaud you, sir.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and it's basically doing something what I call off stream. It's with mainstream. I've gone to several parties that I've been invited to, which are more mainstream quote unquote parties, and they bore the fuck out of me. I mean, it's just the music is just the same repetitious thing. It's just the people are not genuine. It's just fake to me. Whereas again, you put me in a dark room with some really good music and just maybe a red light that's flashing and a fog machine, and I'm home. And a lot of people resonate to that. They it's like a beacon for them, a dark beacon, but it's some place to go and escape and then just feel free, because that's another thing in this scene. I don't know, I can't speak for other scenes across America, but I know as far as New York goes, a lot of people think that in the goth scene there's a lot of judgment and there's cliques, and I've seen that happen, but there's also this thing where you can be totally free. You don't, if you think that you're a freak, come join the other freaks and we'll all party like freaks, and that again is reassuring, knowing that you have some place once a week or once a month that you could just be like free. You could get your freak on, whatever. I've seen women with like body issues that just like they light up the dance floor. That I've seen people who've again, like me, that's just been in a corner just feeling down about myself, that all of a sudden, hey, come here, have a drink, what's up with you, tell me about yourself. And then I've seen where people also, that's a problem, are too scared to approach anybody, and that's why they think that it's cliquish. You do have some cliques. I mean, it's like everywhere, but it's not as bad as like a high school, I say to people, listen, if you feel like you can't approach anybody, you could always approach me. I mean, I have people that they know nobody in the crowd, and as soon as they see me, it's like, hey, are you Sir William Wells? Yes, I am. And then it's like, we'll have a great conversation, and that's what it should be about. Kind of like the European way, actually. Europeans are like, they want to be everybody's friend at first, and I'm French as well, but I grew up here most of my life. But that's another thing, like in Germany and such, and like Sweden, all them, it's like all of a sudden, it's like, hey, come here, you're my friend. Like we're friends all of a sudden. We're sharing a beer, It's like, okay. In New York, I'm like, I don't know you from a hill of beans. It's like, but that's a different cultural, country thing. But
right. Yeah. All right, we're going to go ahead and jump into the news.
If this boy did this and the gothic, stuff that went around it and the motive and everything, don't we all sort of want to know, that could be our teenager, that could be our kid doing that? How could that possibly happen?
Being described as being involved with the goth movement, but what exactly is that? We kind of know it when we see it, but some aspects of a goth lifestyle could they provoke such a murder?
All right, so this month we are talking about a opinion piece, blog that a friend of mine wrote, and it is titled Subcategories of Goth. Do they exist, and are they limiting? It's a pretty controversial topic, and I think she kind of made a decent argument, even though I don't agree with her. So we're going to... I've edited this down just for anyone who is following the link in the show notes, because it is incredibly long.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is huge.
So I've copy-pasted certain portions of it that were relevant that we can talk about. So, and we may end up skipping some of this that I've copied anyway, depending on time. But there's a link in the show notes if you want to read everything in context. But we're just going to cover certain parts. So we'll start at the beginning, though. And she says, Goth has often in recent years been divided into subcategories, and some of them relate to fashion taxonomies. Those are descriptions of what kinds of clothes someone wears. But I think that some of them are more than that. Whether or not they are actually subcategories and whether there should be has been a topic I've been debating recently, so I thought I'd break it down here and how I have observed this playing out. So the first question is, are they more than just fashion styles? And that's the topic of discussion for the first part of her post. So she says, for some people, of course, all goth styles are just different ways of aesthetically expressing their goth tastes. And they might dress trad goth one day, romantic goth the next day, choosing outfits based on the events they're going to, their mood that day, and like a lot of different styles in goth fashion, these fashion styles might not reflect anything of what aspects of goth culture they're into at all. So I guess we'll stop there, and I'm interested how you guys kind of structure the way you dress, and if it is, how do you, what styles, I guess as you could call them, do you normally dress in, and what makes you feel like dressing that way? Is there more behind it than just how it looks?
Yeah, well, I don't really dress, trad goth one day, romantic the next. My style is pretty much consistent, but I would say it has kind of changed over the years. Like, if you looked at me maybe 10 years ago, I dressed more of an industrial style. But I think, really for me, the style just kind of changed along with just my life experiences and just the situations and, living environments that I've been put in over the years. That's kind of shaped my emotional outlook on things, and in turn my aesthetic tendencies. It got to the point with me where I kind of felt like I was wearing a costume, like I was tired of feeling like I was a character from a Matrix movie. and I don't have any problem with like the cyber or industrial style, but I just felt that it didn't really fit me
right
anymore, at least not as much. I found myself leaning toward more of a post-punk death rock inspired kind of look, like the vests and the patches and all of that, and I think a big part of that was also the goth night that I go to now is pretty much all post-punk. So that did play a part, but it was also just me not wanting to feel like I was wearing a costume. It's like that guy in Return of the Living Dead. He's like, "You think this is a fucking costume?" That's basically how I was feeling. It's like I wanted to wear something that just reflected me,
right,
and not some role I was playing.
Right. Yeah. I guess I'm kind of the same way. My dress does kind of just reflect my mood. I have, I'm really into a lot of different styles. I really like the Victorian goth style. I have a lot of clothing that I've ordered in that vein, and I also enjoy the death rock trad goth look and do a lot of DIY. That's kind of what I'm mostly into now. But I've I had a mall goth phase, so that's a thing. But I think I even had kind of a cyber goth phase for a little while. So yeah, I think it does just kind of reflect what I'm into at the time, and I still find all of it aesthetically pleasing, but I also have to kind of tailor it for my body as well, like how I look as a person and what how I can do my makeup or not do makeup and that kind of thing. So it's I'm not someone who is like a stereotype you'd say dyed-in-the-wool Victorian goth or trad goth. Not that that's a bad thing. I'm very good friends with those people. For me though, I go through phases, I guess, like for a few years and then kind of switch it up and do something else.
Yeah.
As for me, my style is basically it basically makes matching clothing and doing laundry very easy. Because everything's black. No, but it's I take a little bit from romantic goth, Victorian goth. I wear cravats and vests. I come from, originally I started with corporate goth because it was just basically black suits, black shirt, and then it became a little bit more romantic. But then it's like skinny pants and then boots. So it's I made it my own. I made it. Romantic Victorian goth-y, again, labels, it's fluid for me. I came up with this philosophy that I mentioned before, whereas goth to me is it's a state of mind first. It's how you identify with like the notion of goth and its aesthetics, and then as a blank slate, it then becomes a state of being, and basically you can adorn yourself however you'd like. I mean, I'm sure there's certain rules, but then again, the rules are being bent left and right nowadays. I don't need to get into Lolita goths.
I think we will.
Yeah, but to each, the way they're making it into their own. I think there needs to be some ground rules to it, but I mean, I'm not gonna, I don't think we should chastise somebody for having just like too much brightness, or it's a tough subject, because in one way we're all like, well, we're just different from mainstream, but then we can't pick and nitpick, at things. And then goth itself, what we're generally talking about, as far as subcultures go, it's like, yeah, where's that limit? Where's that those lines, where those drones? And they're not, just like goth music. I mean, fashion and music play hand in hand, but it's that state of mind first that establishes what is goth. And as long as we're all on that with the same wavelength, and then you could have a cyberpunk, a steam goth, you could have Victorian and a rivet head, and you could go on and on and on. But then again, look at the music; it's the same way. There's no real goth genre. It's all over the place. It's dark wave, synth pop. It's a classic. It's this. So it's being that it's so diverse is inviting in one way, but it's also I understand how it creates a lot of controversy. Hence the the article.
Yeah. Well, it makes something for people to talk about, but also that the kind of fluid boundary allows for structure, but it also allows things to be interesting, because like you said, I think one of the important things is to be able to make something your own, so you're not wearing a costume, like Mark said,
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it's all about evolution, really. This is goth culture, and I use culture with a capital C. Not as a subculture. I hate calling it a subculture. I mean, there's subcultures within the culture, but I call goth with a capital G first, and then the capital C for culture, has been around exactly 40 years. Its inception, through my research, I mean, 1977 was a pivotal year, and it had to evolve up until like 84. But look at, the goths back then. I mean, I don't know how about in your neck of the woods, but here in New York, you don't see anybody with like white makeup, white face makeup anymore. You just don't, unless it's like really like a themed party where we're doing classic goth sushi night or something. But it has evolved, and I think that's what a culture, if a culture wants to survive, it has to evolve. It has to find something new, embrace it, kind of make it its own, or else it just like fizzles out, really. I mean, I don't know about the rest of America, but like, for example, the whole emo thing in New York City, in this area, that's dead. That's like, the goths were just like, get out of here. Just go.
As it should be. Yeah,
just leave. Just, go on to college, become a hippie, and, be
hipster,
the millennial.
whatever.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's just gone. So either that or it engulfed it. And then... Yeah, so it's fluid. As long as it's fluid and as long as it evolves, but it has to have its core base.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Right. No, I totally get that. Well, okay, so let's her best case scenario here for trying to make I don't know. I'm trying to think of a better word than subcategories, but these subcategories is romantic goth for her, because that's her thing. So she says that I identify as a romantic goth and was into romanticism before I was into goth, and am firmly based in romanticism. Sturm und Drang, which is I had to look that up. It's a German literary movement in the 18th century that was about exalting nature and exalting individualism, and it was like in direct opposition to the Enlightenment. So that's a like Gothic kind of thing. Gothic revivalism and other related artistic and literary movements such as Gothic literature, the Pre-Raphaelites, etc. I came to the Gothic before I came to Goth, and my fashion reflects my interests. I am also the sort of goth who loves the atmospheric and ethereal branches of dark wave music like Dead Can Dance, the Cocteau Twins, Soper Eternus, and This Mortal Coil, plus a lot of classical music of the atmospheric and passionate sort. My interests lean towards the romantic and the gothic, and I spend a lot of time in nature seeking an experience of the wilder, more awesome places of our planet. I find my peace and quiet in graveyards. My engagement with goth is primarily with its gothic and romantic aspects in the art history sense of the word. For me, romantic goth is describing a lot more than just a fashion aesthetic. So how do you guys feel about that argument? That's kind of like her best case for romantic goth as being a group unto itself within goth.
Well, I have to agree and disagree. Actually, what she just outlined there is basically I could say the same thing about myself. I was, like I said before, I was attracted more to gothic before becoming goth. Mm-hmm. I do relate to the whole romantic goth, romantic Victorian, but then again, it's where things get tricky is the labels.
Yeah.
That's where things get tricky, where we don't want to be labeled, but yet we label things. It's the hypocrisy. It's also like kind of the same thing in goth. This quandary where this paradox in the goth community where it's like, why are you looking at me? But look, I'm gonna dress, that I attract attention. But don't look at me. And it's like, well,
exactly, yeah.
You don't look like everybody else, so people are gonna look at you. So, yeah. and I think like once you come to terms with that conflict, again, you could be goth, and then if you want to label it, I'm a romantic goth. You could label it to death, but at the end, it's just goth. And
exactly,
and I do like her argument about being attracted to what is gothic and to then be goth. Again, that's exactly my point. State of mind and then state of being. So, the same way too. It was weird reading this because I'm reading it along with you. I started listening to dark classic music, the Cocteau Twins, and then it just progressed, and then here I am. But there needs to be that initial spark, that what draws you to the gothic, and then you could adorn yourself any way you want, and then the labels come afterwards. He's romantic goth, or she's Victorian goth, or that one's a cyberpunk because there's weird things in her hair. So again, it's just and with what I'm doing in the project, it comes into play with that. I mean, it does. And as much as people, especially the goth scene, is like hates labels, they love to label things.
Yeah. So
that's just people in general. I think.
Yeah, it's like an evolutionary trait, really. But I at first I thought the argument was kind of convincing, but the more I thought about it, I kind of came around to the same place that you're at. I mean, I think I would argue that the stuff she's listing as a defense for what could be called a romantic goth lifestyle or subgroup are elements at their base. They're elements that are part of goth culture in general, I think, and goth lifestyle. So there's this quote from a book, Goth Undead Subculture, and they say that goth is a discordant bricolage of hyper-romantic elements. And so I think it's basically that, and it takes on different faces, but at the base it's goth. So you have you have a fascination with death. You have the subversion, cultural subversion element. You have an affinity for the romantic, and the vampiric comes into there, kind of the ethereal stuff. But I would say while the ethereal and the romantic are salient or obvious in the artists she listed, that kind of stuff underlies all the goth genres. If you could point to lyrical and musical elements in death rock and goth rock and post-punk that do incorporate the romantic and the atmospheric and what does she say? Individualism, emotion over rationality, the focus on nature rather than industrialism, that kind of thing. So I think those are the elements that define, or in a way demarcate, I guess, goth culture from like punk or metal. And so I guess my argument is that that's all part of the goth mindset. It's just incorporated into a specific aesthetic.
To quote,
which I think is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, and to quote, well, bringing it to what you just said compared to like, punk culture, to quote Voltaire, actually, once I saw him on CNN or something where he was being interviewed after another, like, vampire freaks related, like, there was some shooting, that bullshit. But he said it quite well and simply, where he's like, punks know that the world is fucked up and they're angry about it. Goths know that the world is fucked up and we're just sad about it. I mean, it's a very simplistic way of saying it. But the reoccurring genre here, the reoccurring baseline is love and death. Okay, I mean, at its core. And then if you take the notion of like a loved one who died, and then you lament by spending all your time in a cemetery, that's where you start getting that, that gothic kind of, and it's apparent in the literature. Because a lot of people think about, goth, it's just music and fashion, but a lot of times, certain people who are just dabbling in goth at first are forgetting about the literature and, the old literature, again, from the romantic period that started with with Lord Byron and where and even before Lord Byron. I mean, I don't have my list here with me of like all of like the very like but like the very old stuff of the castle, I forget the name.
Castle of Otranto.
Yes. Yeah. So all of those again, there's these elements that kind of build up and to start to create a lore. Then when now in 2017 we're like thinking, oh, goth, it's just the Cure, Susie Sue, and you're dressed in black and there's a couple of chains and some spikes and there you go, and and dark makeup from the outside. I mean, from people from mainstream looking in. But again, it's to find out what those core values of goth are. I think in her argument, she's again, I agree and I kind of disagree at the same time, because there's so much emphasis of like the core values are there, and
that's what goth is. Like, this is the way I see it for goth is it's Catherine Spooner says it's compares it to the Gothic, which is a revivalist movement, in that it takes discordant, anachronistic elements and ephemera, takes them from the past and then changes them into whatever the goth thing is, and incorporates it, and then we have that rich history that's kind of tailored to our own thing. So she's going to talk about goth stereotypes, and these are those pretty much everybody's seen those little cartoons that I don't know, I think it was the late 90s, early 2000s somebody started making those. And she said, I'm mentioning these because a lot of people feel like these pseudo infographics inspired a generation of younger goths to start labeling or even pigeonholing themselves. These included a lot more than just clothes that were worn. They included interests, attitude, and music, even if they are deliberately stereotypical, intentionally narrow, and with plenty of hybridization. According to them, I'm a mixture of Victorian, romantic, medieval, vampire, and fairy. The stereotypes were intended as more than just a fashion taxonomy, and this came about for a reason. There really are people who are more into some aspects of goth culture than others, and for a good few people, what aspects they are into are relatively cohesive sets of related interests. Okay, so here's my thought about that, and I'll see what you guys have to say. It's interesting because there's two parts to this, I guess. She's saying that, first of all, these subgroups are cohesive unto themselves and robust enough to be their own categories, but then when she's saying, describing herself, she has to blend several different categories to kind of fit who she is. And I think that kind of speaks to the wider problem here, that the real substance is coming from goth, and like kind of like goth is goth, and these other categories are really just mostly fashion expressions of goth. So the other part of this is she's stating that she says explicitly that these photos were made as a joke, but then she goes on to kind of affirm the fears that she mentions of those stereotypes being followed by using them as part of her argument. So I think, I don't know, the way that I view a goth identity, like we were kind of saying before, it allows for a focus on a specific interest within goth culture, but we don't over label things. It doesn't exclude other things then if you're interested in these in this specific area, because when you start saying you're a something goth, I think it does lead to debates around authenticity and who's true goth and who isn't, and kind of feeling a need to, once, you know, the way the brain works, once we put a box and a label on it, you feel like you have to fit into that thing. And that, I think, kind of leads to becoming disillusioned, or for new goths being frustrated, and kind of those arguments and infighting.
Oh, I believe that new goths are having a real tough time.
Yeah.
They are, because it has flourished out, and branched out so much that, and each branch has its own label. And like, for example, her argument is, I mean, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 different descriptions between Victorian, romantic. I mean, it's like, whoa, you know, the vampire thing, again, not to get really into the vampire versus goth thing, but it's, those two aesthetics just kind of borrow from each other. There's like an overlapping, you know, it's just an overlapping. So the vampire thing, unless you're really into the vampire scene, that could be just that's basically Victorian romantic there. Medieval, you know, and fairy, fairy, you put on some wings, and then you could call yourself a fairy. You know, again, there's so much. The goth culture is just, at this point, a big blender. You know, and things are getting mixed up so much, and there's so much overlapping. And again, going to younger goths who are especially under the age of 18 or 21, going through their teen angst, I could totally relate that there is so much out there, you know, and it's too fluid, you know, at this point.
Yep.
And that's where something like emo pops up. You know, because then there was like, oh, we're just going to call it like we're extra sad, you know, so with a Justin Bieber haircut, you know, so that's where you know, emo pops up from, because you have these teenagers, these kids who, you know, not call, and then again, I know this was like a further note, the thing with calling them baby bats, and that's, you know, cute on one point, but then it's derogatory on another, and there's all of that mixed in together into this blender. And that's where the whole controversy is. And, you know, that's why her article, again, I agree with on some points. And then some points it's like, you know, she's saying, well, things are too labeled, but then it's like going back to those labels. So where's the line is my question.
Right. Yeah, and that's why I think anytime someone is trying to define either what goth is or what a goth identity is, you have to leave room for ambiguity. And I think that goth kind of thrives in the ambiguity. It can't get to the point, like you were saying, where there's, you know, if you take postmodernism too far, then we have a serious problem because nothing means anything.
You can't have too much ambiguity.
There's a balance. Yeah,
exactly. That balance. Exactly. And that's where we're all, not arguing over, but we're all trying to figure it out, that what that balance is. And I think goth in a way has its own way of balancing it out. But now, you know, again, you know, internet, TV, and all of like the technologies come into play. But getting back to what your initial question was, which I want to know what she means by like the you know, the jokes or the stereotypes seen on mainstream television. I mean, is it from like, you know, Beetlejuice the cartoon, or, you know, the Addams Family, or, you know, first of all, you have to kind of name those stereotypes, or identify them.
Let me see if I can send you this link, because I think you'll probably recognize what she's referencing here. Because it's a what are they, goth? They're called goth stereotypes. Here, let me.
No, I have the link. I have the link.
Oh, okay, cool, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, those little Characters, right. Again, those are going to appeal to I remember seeing these. There's a good appeal to like the younger generation of goths that are trying to figure themselves out. Because at that age, you're looking at high school, middle school, high school age where that whole gothic sensibility starts to come to light, and then there's identity crisis, and is it just a phase, and all of that comes into play. So making a little cartoon of it, and it's like, oh, she's a belly dancing goth, and that one's a fairy, and that one's it dumbs it down. Sure, it dumbs it down. It definitely dumbs it down and makes it cutesy. But you know what? There's no other roadmap. It's the same thing with like what I say with like these places. I'm trying to look again with New Goth City. I'm trying to look for places and scenes in rural areas for these kids to go to, and there's just the only thing is Hot Topic. The only thing,
right?
And so where do you go? I mean, you have the internet now, but so these kids are feeling frustrated beyond frustrated of just being goth, and what their family thinks of them and what their, the kids at school think of them. And so these things pop up. It's these little goth stereotypes. Again, it's a dumbed down version of it, but it's the only roadmap that some people have in a way.
Right. Right.
But dare I click on to view all types? Oh yeah, this. Oh boy. Oh boy. Okay.
Well, let's move on here. I think we'll probably cover this next section and then probably leave it at that for time. Maybe we'll come back to it in a future episode. But this part is she's going to try and break down what she sees as the legitimate main subcategories of goths. So she's got a little intro here that I'll read first to this section. She says, from what I have observed in the scene, there is often more to these labels than just clothes, like she said before. These categories, subcategories, are about which aspects of the subculture you primarily engage with, what sort of attitude to goth you have, and perhaps what sorts of music you listen to. To be a subcategory of goth, something has to be within that which is goth, the music, attitudes, aesthetics, which in combination make goth, and serve as a direction from which those things are approached, or an alignment of which things within goth someone likes, and it has to be more than just aesthetic. I don't know. I think the problem with this, I think, is that once you do start labeling stuff, it becomes self-reinforcing, because if someone says, no, I'm not part of those labels, then you can say, well, you're an everything goes goth, which is something I've heard before. And so there's, and with, like I was saying before, with the categories, there's like an implicit pressure on the person to fit into that and to be that, especially for baby bats, that I think can be harmful. And by narrowing, like you were saying, William, by narrowing or directing your interests so much within goth, something that's already pretty niche, even though it's robust, I think it becomes too thin. There's not enough substance there, and that, I think, can lead to people getting burned out or people getting bored, not feeling like they're expressing themselves because there's not enough room within that to grow. And so, yeah, I mean, the way, like I kind of said before, when we're talking about goth, you can allow for each individual person to make a part of goth that they most identify with, their area of focus. I have this thing I call the homology hypothesis, which is, homology is essentially just a coming together of a specific set of values and like accepted norms and kind of pillars of a culture into one thing. So you can have this amalgam of stuff that you identify as, and then you just have more of an emphasis on one thing or another within the larger label. So you have the ability to say, you know what, this is kind of boring now, but I also have these other things that are within this group, and now I can go explore those things, and those all have their own branches and histories and aesthetics and that kind of thing. So I think that's more healthy because, again, when we're talking about labels, they're so sticky and they attach to us. And I think that leads to too many problems when you just divide everything up.
And it can lead, I know you touched on this, but it can actually lead to some people leaving the scene because they feel that they're too boxed in and there are no other alternatives.
I hear that a lot. Yeah, especially with older people. I mean, you have, of course, the original musicians and things. I was just reading about how Susie was saying the same thing where she said, she said something to the effect of, I identify with the gothic, but when it comes to goth, it seems like it's all just about horror and monsters and stuff. And I think that's the problem, is because it's people taking too narrow of a view, because like I said, it leads to these debates about what's authentic. So you have a loud group of people saying, this is what authentic goth is. It's the Batcave with the schlocky horror stuff and whatever. And Susie's like, well, I don't like that, and I don't identify as that, and so why I think it's shit. So everything that's goth is shit. And then people are like, well, I'm not goth. I don't identify with any of that. Let me. My son just ran upstairs. Let me give him a hug because he just got home. Hey, buddy, you got a boo boo? You okay?
I fell down and nose and I got on me.
Oh, are you all right?
Yeah.
You're here with mommy though?
Yeah.
Okay, give me a hug, baby. I'm going to finish doing my podcast and then I'll come downstairs, okay? Can you close my door? Thank you. All right. So basically she outlines 4 of the main legitimate subcategories to her. So the first one was romantic goth. We won't cover that because we talked about it. The next one is trad goths. So about trad goths, she says, people who call themselves trad goths or are referred to as such by others. It's an interesting argument in itself, is who gets to define the people on the outside or the people on the inside. But they tend to be very music focused, especially following the original 80s bands and the subsequent musicians that work with a very 80s post-punk, cold wave, or similar sound, having more of a focus on club culture, and also coming with a distinct fashion style, as I described above. A lot of trad goths seem a bit closer to goths' punk roots in their fashion, more spikes, more post-punk music where the sound is closer to punk, and sometimes more of an attitude of rebellion, or at least defiance of the norms imposed. So is all that stuff unique to trad goths?
Trad goth to me is I don't know, that's a broad stroke. That's trying to create a label with like just throwing a whole bucket of black paint on the wall. I mean, it's because you listen to, like, you might be into, Susie or whatever, anything from the 80s, then you're trad goth. I don't know. We're all trad goth, I guess, in some weird way. I've only heard of trad goth like very recently popping out as a thing, but I guess maybe that's a polite way of renaming elder goths, I guess. The old timers. But yeah, it's just
depends on who you talk to, right?
Exactly. I mean, yeah, classic goth, sure. I think one thing that's really what I really don't like about this trad goth thing is that I tend to believe that the entire Gothic community, I'm not a young man, but the entire Gothic community, whether you're in your 20s or earlier than your 20s, or I have Goth friends who are in their mid-60s, and we all have this one thing in common. It's not about age. It's about, you have a respect for the classic Goth roots. And if you go into music as a springboard, for me, music, this is what I learned from being an editor in film and such. To me, music is mood. Depending, you could listen to a lot of different things, but it depends on your mood and what,
Yeah.
like, you know, and music resonates that. So I think to really lock down, again, it's with my state of mind and state of being philosophy that I think if you lock down goth culture with just music and fashion, you're limiting yourself.
Yeah.
It's more of just this, again, it's more fluid. It's just and then when you start putting words like trad goth, I mean it even goes so lazy that it doesn't even use the whole word of traditional. It's, you know, it's and again, it's just, it sounds to me it's juvenile. And it's just kind of trying to categorize something that's just classic. Use classic goth. That's even more eloquent to me.
Or post-punk, like.
Yeah, and post-punk. I mean, post-punk is another thing where
you
know, glam, post-punk and glam came together, and that was a spark, and that's what was goth, and we could go into the history of it. I've done my research, and I could do a whole other podcast on just the history of goth.
Maybe we'll do that.
But when this thing called trad goth comes up, it's just, I don't know. To me personally, it's demeaning, and I think that everybody should have a little bit of trad, quote unquote, goth in them if you're going to be part of the goth scene.
Yeah,
you know, like know your roots. Just that's it.
Exactly. You know? Yeah, and that's I agree with that, because going, you know, looking at what her markers for a trad goth are, you've got what did she say? So more of a club focus. I think that's kind of a strange thing. I think it just depends on the person when it comes to that.
Yeah.
Saying that there's more of an attitude when it comes to the attitude because it's closer to the punk roots. I guess that might make some kind of intuitive sense as like a possible correlation, but with post-punk, it wasn't just a departure musically. It was an ideological departure from punk. So it wasn't. I don't think you could say it's more or less rebellious or subversive than just goth in general. It maybe just in a different way. And you know, if you want to say it's a death rock look, well, yeah, but so we've got a fashion aesthetic there. We don't necessarily have something more robust than that.
But like, you know, in general, like our discussion was like, how many shades of gray do you need?
Yeah.
You know, with the labels, it's like you could go from black to white, and sure, there are shades of gray, but, and I'm not going to quote that awful book, but I'm not alluding to that. I'm not alluding to that. Let me make that perfectly clear. But there's only so many shades of gray you could break down to, like, post-punk, but with a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and then the more nitty-gritty you get, I mean, you're just going to drive yourself insane.
Yeah.
You know? And again, and the reverse is true. You know, there's not just black and white or black, gray, and white, where trad goth is just kind of like a you know, just a broad stroke or something. There are shades of gray, but there needs to be not a hard line and a definition of how many gray shades there are, but I mean, at least like a commonsensical one. You know, because again, if you start saying, well, if you were in post-punk in this year of this month, then you were slightly more goth than that. No, it's just, it all just becomes, it's just being. Listen, the goth movement really, you know, that's what's also amazing is that it happened in England and in America kind of like at the same time. And that's like, you know, and we didn't have the internet. We didn't have, you know, England was like 6 months behind with the music in America, and America was 6 months behind with the music in America, but it found its way. It found its way from post-punk and glam and all the other weird junk that was happening in 1977, you know?
Yeah. And there were really, if you've read Andy Harriman's book, Somewhere Leather, Somewhere Lace, there were even more obscure countries, European, like small European countries, and some other I'm trying to remember, like Peru or some Hispanic places, I can't remember specifically, where there were at the same time completely, you know, just somehow within the zeitgeist, those small scenes were forming that you don't hear about as much because they were, you know, more cut off from everything. But,
Mexico, for example, even now I think Mexico is like the biggest the best-selling like metal is like, it's huge. The metal scene in Mexico is just humongous. It's just you know, but yeah, all these little tiny countries, and it was like kind of all over, and then it kind of sprouted and came to its own. But then again, it took years. It took from 77 to the mid 80s to really kind of form,
Right.
I mean, I keep talking about 1977, but that's just a spark. That's just, the Rocky Horror Picture Show came out that year. Everything was horrible in 1977. The only good thing that came out of it was, Rocky Horror Picture Show, Jaws, and like Star Wars. Elvis died. I was there. I lived it. I was young, but still, 1977 was a horrible, horrible year, and people just were depressed. And the 80s then became that whole that Reagan era me kind of we're kind of seeing that now, where it's like it's all about me and on demand and the mall and spending. And I think that there were goths that from the late 70s into the early 80s that didn't forget that life is pretty shitty, and they were in a dark mood. And again, music and fashion follows that. It doesn't define goth. The music and the fashion express it, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Yeah. Okay, so let's finish these last two she has here, which are J-goth and death rock. And then I think what I'll do is, just for time, the rest of this article, maybe I'll talk about it on a Patreon specific separate episode. But let's I had something here I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on with the J-goth thing. So let's talk about that first, and then I've got a quote for you. So she says, J-goth, or Japanese goth, is certainly its own subcategory too. Non-Japanese J-goths tend to be more into the contemporary Japanese culture and the Japanese take on goth, rather than only wearing the street styles, and often have an interest in anime and manga, especially those with darker gothic and morbid themes, and also Japanese bands that have either a gothic aesthetic with a metal sound or are outright goth bands from Japan. There's obviously goths in Japan, and they invented this. They've been doing goth with their own twist for decades, as goth is always a subculture, and Japan has its own culture to be the parent culture, and through cross-cultural pollination, it has spread to influence goths outside of Japan.
Would industrial be G-goth? Like German goth?
German goth. First of all, so she's saying, goth is a subculture, and if it's under a different parent culture, then therefore it has its own thing. But while I maybe can agree that goth happening. So first of all, goth, one of the important markers of goth, and one of the reasons people argue for goth as a culture, is because it's incredibly consistent across countries and across other cultures. But there are certainly regional variances, generally I think they're pretty subtle. But to say that you now were dividing goth up into regional groups, I think that's kind of dangerous, and I don't think that's sociologically sound either. My experience with Japanese goth, so Gothic Lolita is a whole different thing from this, and we're not going to get into that actually for time. But I wouldn't say because someone is into manga with gothic themes and also goth that would cause, call for them to be a Japanese goth. My experience with goth bands from Japan are like 13th Moon, Neurotic Doll, Automod, and Fadia, and those are all basically like death rock bands. And if you look at the style and everything, it's pretty similar with what we see over here. So I don't see the need to separate culture in that way. We talked about this already with the whole goth being an appropriation of other stuff to bring into goth and to make it goth in its own way. So once you start saying these are UK goths, or these are American goths, or these are, I think that's just that doesn't sit right with me. And part of the problem here is if we assume goth as a subculture, right? If we're looking at this from her perspective, rather than calling goth a culture, we won't make that argument here. But if we take that view, it's not the parent culture is not interpolated to the subculture. It's the other way around. So she's got it backwards there. We're not even if you're taking a sort of new subculturalist perspective based on the CCCS Birmingham School of Sociology, which focused largely on Marxist structuralist theory, you still can't apply such a broad brush, because to say it's a subculture underneath a Western parent culture or an Eastern mass culture, therefore all subcultures will manifest in this specific way in relationship to the parent culture. It's not that simple. It's sometimes there are ideological influences, sometimes there are pop culture influences, there could be purely aesthetic influences, moral, normative, value type claims that are being either subverted or embraced, except in an alternative way. You have semiotic expressions of that can change. So I just don't think, I won't get into the technicalities, kind of the academic take on it at the moment, much more than I have, but I don't think that stands up from a sociological perspective, though I would like to have the conversation. I don't think I'm prepared to evaluate it accurately at the moment, but it doesn't sit right with me.
Everything about the whole J-Goth, Japanese goth thing doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah.
And Lolita Goth, only because you've got two contradictory things going on here. It's, first of all, you have to look at Japanese culture as a whole, modern Japanese culture, okay? And where not everything, but a lot of things is fad based. So to me, to me, it's not so much. It's the horse is behind the cart here, where it's not like there's Japanese goths that kind of came. It's that goths were cool, so we're gonna make it our own way. We're gonna, again, you said with the music, it does sound more death rock than anything else. It's not, and again, to me, it just seems like, damn, I don't want to use the word poser, but it just smacks of that. You know what I'm saying? It's like they're trying too hard to make it like, it's cool and it's hip and and it's different, and so we're getting attention for being that way, so it's got to be like, good.
There's a lot of and I mean, someone please correct me if write in and tell me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, a lot of Japanese culture is about venerating American stuff, and it ends up kind of coming off as kind of like a pastiche or kind of poser, I guess would be another word, but because they're not really doing their own thing, they're trying to emulate something else. And right. Not everything, obviously. I mean, there's very old Japanese culture and stuff, but in the more pop culture kind of thing is how it comes off.
I totally agree with you, and the fact that again, where you try to appropriate something, but then they're putting their own modern pop Japanese twist to it, and then, in my opinion, and this is only my opinion, it turns off cartoonish. And then, and several people that I know that agree with me, it could be turning it into like a cartoon can kind of also make it offensive to those who live a lifestyle. I mean, a lifestyle of goth. I wanted to bring this up before, but there's certain people that are only able, because of their lives and work and everything, that are able to be goth on the weekends or going to a club or to a concert, and they get to dress up. I personally am fortunate enough to that I can dress and be goth 24/7. But then you have where it becomes like we were talking before, is it a costume, or is it lifestyle? Is it a fad? Is it because, you want to fit in and all your friends are like going to, put on black eyeliner and bop around at some concert that's quote unquote goth, because it's something different? Or is it because it's part of who you are? And I'm just not convinced that the whole Japanese J-goth thing is a real thing to me. And again, using the word, making it like a national thing, like USA goth, French goth, Mexican goth. No, that shouldn't exist. That shouldn't happen. Yeah. Only because the only reason that you do use the word Japanese or J is because the Japanese pop culture is already so different from the other rest of the world. Yeah. So it's identifiable by that, meaning that it's like, well, it's more fad based than the rest of the goth scenes. I mean, in my mind.
And I mean, I'll confess ignorance mostly for this. I don't have a great understanding of Japanese goth culture, so I'd be happy to hear anyone who wants to write in and elucidate that specifically. But I'll go ahead and close with this portion with this quote that I pulled, and I think it really illustrates what I'm trying to get at with goth as a revivalist movement. So let me read this here, and here I think you guys are going to agree, but I think this is kind of important and kind of eloquent, really. So this is from a sociology book, and he says, in some ways, goth culture provides this context for its members by suggesting connections to an ancient and largely idealized tradition. Groups of goths who dress in Victorian clothing, for instance, and even adopt some aspects of social behavior from the period, may feel they are taking part in a type of alternative cultural lineage. In effect, the goths have created a tribe of fictionalized culture within which any individual, regardless of his or her own background, can become part of a virtually timeless tradition. It might even be argued that in some cases, goth has become a type of fantasy ethnicity, superimposed on the physical features of an individual. Whether one's skin is brown or white, the black dress, makeup, and other aspects of goth take precedence, creating a sense of belonging that is beyond ethnic origin. In these ways, goth culture can potentially provide for its members a substitute for biological family, history, cultural tradition, and even race. As these arguments suggest, there is far more to goth than wanting to be different. There are many ways to set oneself apart from the mainstream, but those who choose to be goth also just have an interest in highly uncommon and specific set of tastes and desires. The goth aesthetic is derived from the dark side of human nature, from the dangers that threaten our lives, and the social and spiritual response to fear, death, and loss. As such, goth culture is part of a cross-cultural tradition, reaching perhaps the very foundations of human existence. And I personally really like just the expression of how goth transcends where you were born, what race you were, what gender, any of that stuff, that it's its own cultural history. And I like that a lot.
Well, I take a little bit of issue to that, because I guess, you could argue it in like a Victorian goth sense that it could be construed as, kind of a fantasy world that's been crafted, but I think that really depends on the individual. I think you could argue that goth is a true expression of reality of one's self, and that it's anything but fantasy, and you could argue that the mainstream culture is the fantasy and goth culture is reality.
I don't know if I would go that far, but I do agree that it is absolutely an expression of reality. I think it's more from the perspective of cultural boundaries from different countries. That it doesn't matter where you come from, you can be part of this family that has its own history. Yeah, I think maybe the fictionalized verbiage he used there was kind of not quite right, but I see where you're coming from. I agree with that.
I agree with the majority of it, but also, like what Mark said, the word fantasy is a bit too
right. Yeah.
much. I wouldn't call it fantasy because, again, for a lot of people that I know, I mean, it's their own reality. They made goth their own reality, myself included. It becomes a lifestyle. The word fantasy is
It's not like cosplay or anything.
no,
Right.
no.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, yeah, I agree. Especially here in New York, I mean, the scene is really diverse. It's really has a wonderful diversity, and again, within that diversity, there is that common link. I mean, not only just with race, gender, but again with age, with just all of it. Kind of there's this common understanding between everybody, even if there was cliques or
right.
if there's subsections, or again, we could break it down like we've been doing for the past hour, but within that there is a common understanding, and it's like it's us versus them. Not so much. It's basically we're our own little safe haven,
Right.
and then again there's always drama with every culture, but that gets weeded out. At the end of the day, it's all about, hey, what's happening this weekend? Where are we all going to get together and basically be surrounded by like-minded people? And that's what everybody wants. I mean, it's, tribalism at its core. It's basically finding, people who just share the same values and aesthetics, and you want to, just be around them.
All right, so we are going to move on. Instead of a album review this month, we have a little crossover action here. So if you don't know, one of the podcasts on the Belfry Network is called Horror Addicts, and they've been running a contest called the Next Great Horror Writer Contest, and they've had a bunch of people submit articles and stories and things like that, and the winners get rewarded with various prizes. The grand prize was that they would get actually a publication deal, so that's pretty insane. But one of the smaller prizes was having their piece read on this podcast. Basically, it's a kind of blog style article talking about virtual reality and being able to experience horror in a video game or in a movie, and this kind of future technology, sitting down at the table with the killers, with the whatever cannibal family, instead of and like hearing them eating your friend's leg next to you, and kind of smelling the flesh and everything like that. So I wanted to I think it is kind of a crossover, because after this we're going to jump in and talk about xenogoth here. So let's go ahead and read this, and we will have a little discussion about it. This is titled "Virtual Reality is Revolutionizing Horror," and the author is Harry Husbands. Imagine you enter a theater in the year 2025 and take a seat. In front of you is a device that you place on your head and over your ears. Your vision is blackened. 30 minutes of adverts begin, because some things just never change. Eventually the film starts and you're in a corridor where the light bulb flickers and a putrid smell of rotting meat wafts to your nostrils. You are creeping forward when the light goes out completely. There's icy breath on the back of your neck. You not only hear it, but you feel it too. For an avid horror fan, contemporary films are failing to scare. In years gone by, ambulances would be on hand to aid shaken moviegoers who had just witnessed The Exorcist. Now audiences leave with a craving for something more. Whether it's due to cheap jump scares and over-the-top gore, or that we're all just too jaded, you only have to observe the hungry hordes scouring scariest horror film lists online to see what I mean. Regardless of why, the ultimate question remains: where do we turn for thrills? Well, look, my friends, to the all-encompassing art form of video games. Horror has been a consistent genre in the evolution of video games. From early pixelated ghouls to block-headed zombies, and now the fully fleshed out immersive terror you can experience today. With the latest technology, you can be in the freaking game, and developers have clearly been taking note from horror masters because they've created settings in which you hardly dare to take another step. Virtual reality is, at its most basic, the visual equivalent of headphones. The difference, however, between having a very special feast with the Baker family on a screen that's 10 feet away to having them shout and chew in your face is the difference between kinda scary and pants-soiling horrific. It's not just monsters, zombies, and loud noises either. With virtual reality, you can experience being trapped in a car that's slowly filling with water, interviewing a serial killer who keeps smiling at you because they know where you live, or turning up at the office on the day of an important meeting wearing only your birthday suit. How can films compete? They can't, and you might be thinking that it's futile for me to compare such different platforms. I just feel that video games are taking the torch of fear and running with it at full speed. Where films are failing to deliver scares, video games offer a solution. Of course, it's hard to know what I'm talking about without giving it a go yourself, and as virtual reality is becoming more accessible every day, it's getting easier to do. Just don't say I didn't warn you about the pants soiling. So now that we've heard it, let me ask you a couple questions, and I guess we can start off with technology and its relationship to goth, and what kind of relationship you see there, not just with the internet, which is something we've talked about before, but kind of cutting-edge technology like VR, even going into clothing technologies. They're working on, they did the most ultra black known to man. They've done, people have been working on like invisibility cloaks, that kind of thing. You've got robotics you could talk about. And if this stuff is largely ignored, should it be incorporated? Is that the future? Could it have some impact on the club scene and how we experience stuff and get together, or even how music is made, how we dress, that kind of stuff? You guys have thoughts on that? Otherwise, I can tell you some thoughts and you guys can think about it.
Yeah, you guys go first. I'm
sure.
Interested to hear what you guys have to say.
Yeah, I think to a large extent, a lot of cutting edge technology is expensive. That's the first problem, and goths don't tend to have a lot of money. So once that stuff does get incorporated into the general public, like how we see like the ubiquity of smartphones, that's a different way of experiencing reality. You've got there's been philosophical discussions about that, and about how we fundamentally interact and experience reality differently that way. I do think it could be interesting to see this kind of stuff get incorporated into clubs. Again, I think the barrier of entry here is money, but you have seen stuff where you'll have I don't know what these parties are called specifically, but you'll get everyone will show up in some kind of outdoor space. So for a goth night, it could be like in a cemetery at night. And everybody will bring their phone and some headphones, and then they all tune in. Yeah, you all tune into the thing, and you can all hear it, but it's not out. It's only on your headphones. So and I think that's kind of like a cool, like virtual way to experience, and it opens up opportunities for you to go to different places and things like that. I think that's one way we can see it. Aesthetically, I think the only way we see that kind of cutting edge thing would be on the runway, the kind of real weird stuff where they're experimenting with that kind of thing. But I mean, that does have an impact that kind of trickles down into other fashion, which eventually trickles down into the thrift stores, and then we kind of appropriate and modify that. But I think a lot of goth aesthetic is about deconstructing. Even if, thinking about cyber goth, that was kind of the hope for that, is to be that kind of retro future where they have cutting edge technology that they're modifying. But I don't even really see it other than, some LEDs and stuff. I think steampunk is doing a lot of cool stuff with that like retro technology.
With when it comes to fashion, though, I mean, a big part of goth and especially a big part of steampunk cosplay and all that, it's the whole do-it-yourself, thing. And again, like what you pointed out, I mean, if you're going to buy some sort of technological, fashion, that's going to set you back thousands of dollars. That's, I mean, unless you're making, you're part of a band and you could afford something like that. Other than that, I think a lot of people are just more do-it-yourselfers in the scene. I think I know how to sew. It's I could sew on a button, I could put on a spike somewhere, and I think a lot of people in the goth scene, and again, especially in the steampunk scene. I know steampunks that when they go out, they don't drink because all of their money has gone into their their outfit, and so again, like you said, unless that stuff trickles down through a thrift store, it's not going to pick up that rapidly.
Yeah.
I am curious to see though how it could be incorporated into the club scene. Like, I think it'd be interesting to walk into a goth club one day and see like a hologram of Robert Smith, playing his guitar.
As far as the silent parties go, if I remember correctly, the Cat Club in San Francisco, I listed once. They did try a goth silent party. Well, not so much goth. It was kind of, you had two channels to listen from. Two different types. I think one was like goth and one was industrial. And everybody was there for a silent party with their headphones. I don't know how it turned out, but it was a try.
And I think, with VR, it would be interesting. And I mean, I asked here, is there a potential for a xenogoth crossover? But in the club space too, if I don't think it could ever replace in-person club environments, but if you were able to, and I think Second Life tried to do this, and some people still frequent it. It didn't pan out for me. But if you were able to put on a headset and have this kind of 3D virtual reality where it's more tactile, it's more real, and get to socialize that way from your own home, customize your appearance and all that stuff. I don't think that would ever catch on as a replacement, but I think it could be an interesting kind of use of the technology, though.
Yeah, but that's kind of caving in, though. That's like caving in syndrome. I mean, technically, right now, in 2017, you could technically never leave your house and have everything delivered and keep up with friends. And Life 2, is that even still a thing? I mean, I never really tried it, but there was actually, like in Life 2, I remember there were actual monies going back and forth. People would be buying and selling clothes, and
I quick aside, I played Second Life for a time, and I had a wife and a house, and I ran a vampire community in Second Life. So I dived balls deep into that, and didn't work out. But I
think if you took that and you put on VR headsets, I just think a lot of people would be bumping into each other. That's just the way I see it. Like if you put a bunch of people in a space, and it's like you're in your virtual nightclub, and you're just walking around, I think the technology, people just be bumping into each other and falling down, and it's funny to me because virtual reality, when I was a lot younger in the 80s, that's, Max Headroom, the whole thing that started, and then it went away. It just went away. Yeah. And then in the past, 4 years with Oculus Rift and all that, it just kind of popped back up because people are looking for something new. But it's what happened to that? There's a 20-year gap where that technology was just dormant for some strange reason.
Yeah. And well, even now, though, I don't think the thought was we got to the point where we could make it well and it could be affordable, but I don't think we're even now quite there. I've had time with some VR, not the good ones like the expensive Oculus Rift, the ones that are $800 or more. But even then, you still have issues with, tactile function and spatial issues, walking around your house. How far can you go? So even there, it's not the future like the Star Trek.
The holodeck. That's what I'm waiting for.
Yeah,
that's what I'm waiting for. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I don't think we're quite there, and I don't know if it caught on enough. I think it's still kind of a niche thing, but I'm hopeful. But I just don't think it's there yet.
I think the VR is there's some wonderful things in VR that's happening on the, for the medicine world, and for, and doing surgeries by proxy and such. But that's medicinal. But as far as when it comes to the VR that we all know and are hearing about now, that's basically, I think at its core, gamers looking for like the next dimension, the next big thing.
Right.
It's just gamers immersing themselves more into the game.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a huge Fallout fan, and if I could play Fallout on, with VR and all that, you'll never see me again. I will be living in the wastes, and it'll turn into like that episode of what was it with like Cartman and of South Park when they all like do the Worlds of Warcraft and they're just like sitting at their desks trying to defeat the guy. Exactly. And it's like, I don't know, is that what we want as a future? It's becoming more and more like WALL-E, where people are just kind of ordering things and they're just watching a screen. And again, that's why I think in the goth scene, because we have like want for something simpler and like more retrospective, like, that we want to go out and actually socialize and not be on our phones. Again, I've been to mainstream parties where there's a room full of people, there's a DJ, and everybody is just talking or taking selfies on their phones, and that's it.
Yeah.
Before we get into the philosophy corner, we are, of course, going to take a break here and thank our Patreon members. I decided way back when I was trying to get the concept for the show together, for Cemetery Confessions, that is, that I didn't want to do interruption marketing. I briefly considered trying to get advertisers that were relevant to the show, but realized that nobody likes interruption marketing. It's aggravating, and sometimes it can be even worse than that. For example, I was just listening to a podcast, and not only did they have an ad at the beginning and an ad at the end, neither of which I cared about and was pretty annoying to try and skip over when I was driving, but they had the main portion of the show was an interview with someone who was pretty well known and respected and had written many books, and they were talking about really important social issues and kind of divisive topics, and really, it wasn't just kind of a fun entertainment show. They were really tackling some difficult issues. And there were 3 ad interruptions during this interview, and the interview wasn't even that long, and the ad interruptions, some of them had multiple ads in them. And I thought that was grossly horrific, not just from a listener standpoint, but just from a not just kind of ruining the flow of the interview. It was kind of disrespectful to the guest, in my opinion, and it took away from the importance of the topics. And I almost didn't finish the interview, and I'm glad I did because there was some great stuff in there, but I almost didn't finish it because of the ads. So, the decision I made was I want to be beholden to my creative vision and to you, the listener, and what you want from the show. Adding an advertiser into the mix kind of opens up the flow and the structure and the content of the show to be directed by a third party, and that's not what I want to do. So I've been incredibly blessed with the support I've gotten from Patreon members, and that's why we take this one moment show to thank them for paying the bills for the show so we can stay on and keeping the show ad-free so you can enjoy it and consume it in a meaningful and uninterrupted way. So first of all, at the founders level, we have Abigail, Esmeralda, Luna, and Willow Gothic. At the Nocturnal Council level, our supporters are Trey, Nephilim Incorruptus, Devin, Necromancy Radio, Anthony, and Kay. And then at the Crow's Call level, we have Paula, Robin, Angela Benedict, Dom, Elizabeth, Marco, David, Brenda, Shelley, Rick, Angel, Elizabeth, Jen, Mahareen, Lyralith, Michelle, Jillian Venters, On the 13th, and Noir Lilith. Thank you again so much for your support of the show and for really shaping and making this show exist. I would like to mention, if you did not know or may have forgotten if you looked a long time ago, the Patreon page is creeping closer and closer to the next tier goal. So while there are individual rewards you can get from becoming a Patreon member, like Patreon-only videos, T-shirts, Skype calls, all those other kinds of things, once we get to this next level on the Patreon page, a couple other things unlock. If we can make it there, I will be able to send out a reward to a random Patreon member, everyone from $1 a month and up, and that reward will be $35 of anything of your choosing, and that can include the Cemetery Confessions shirt that almost no one has access to. And I'll be able to send that out to a random Patreon member, and we will also start organizing Patreon Google Hangouts with myself and hopefully Mark and some of the other guests and hosts of the show. So those are a couple things that we can unlock if we get to this next level, and we're getting closer and closer. So if you want to help us reach that goal, if you want to just show your support for the show or get your name read on the show or get any of these other extra content rewards, you can go to patreon.com/cemeteryconfessions and donate starting at $1 a month, and that will get you access to all the extra bonus content on the Patreon page, as well as put you in the drawing to win that prize, bi-monthly prize, if we, once we get to that level. So check it out. Support the show if you like it. Patreon.com/cemeteryconfessions.
We spend so much time trying to define what is goth. This is a very important question that, of course, we're going to also try and define what is not goth. Like most civilizations of the world over, we tend to be judgmental of people who don't look like us, who don't have the same beliefs. So why goths have half a dozen different words for poser instead of just one is probably a reflection of how important it is for them to define gothdom.
You don't wake up one day and decide that you are goth. It's a mindset. It comes naturally. It's a lifestyle.
Just so you know, goth is about 3 things: clothing, music, and lifestyle.
I don't actually have a problem with the goth stereotype of the droopy music and the lots of eyeliner and all black.
It's not about being depressed, and it's not about being sad and locking yourself in a dark corner and just writing sad poetry until your fingers bleed.
The goth culture is finding beauty where other people wouldn't think to look.
What is goth? It started out as an artistic movement about 400 years ago. Gothic art, Gothic architecture, Gothic literature. Where do you think we get the term Gothic novels from?
To me, what goth is a movement where people who like a certain type of music dress in a certain way to express that taste in music, and that's all it is. It's just an aesthetic thing.
So what makes you goth is not to do with any kind of criteria. I don't know why people set out criteria.
There's a very few things that I actually call goth. You see, that is the difference between old school goths and many other people, is that we are very cautious about what we call goth, actually.
A lot of kids become goths because it just looks cool, and that's fine too. But at its core, it really is this this dismissing of the mainstream belief that we're happy all of the time and no one's ever sad,
Let's go ahead and jump into the Future of Goth discussion, and I guess a good place to start, I'll just start with the basics here, and that's explain to us what xenogoth is and kind of why you conceptualized it in the first place, how that kind of came to be.
Okay, well, xenogoth, first of all, like, a lot of people are already, baring their teeth and claws are out. I'm not trying to reinvent the entire goth culture. I'm just trying to put something out there that's trying to.
How dare you try to put something out there?
Yeah, how dare I? But no, it's listen. Here in New York, I'm getting a lot of, like we talked before, like just there's people who are just in the goth scene that are just bored. They're not coming out as much. There used to be theme parties every month where people got excited to go and get a costume and get dressed up, and and there's not that energy anymore. And then a lot of people, well, a lot of goths like tend to do is complain. So basically, I'm in the position with what I do with New Goth City that I hear a lot of voices and I get a lot of feedback, and I try to, I work in marketing as well, and I work in a lot of different fields, and again trying to further the scene here in New York and in America and maybe overseas. I hear like the complaints, and I want to bring a solution. Right now we're in 2017. As I said before, it's been 40 years of goth. Okay, 40 years. So you have old ones like me, you have young ones that are just figuring out. But there's also, this trend between Comic-Cons, cosplay, all the movies that are coming out, the Alien movies, Guardians of the Galaxy, Blade Runner 2. I mean, Blade Runner itself has got a foothold in the goth scene. If anything, cyberpunk and cybergoth. So what I wanted to do, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm just trying to coin something.
Ass.
Yeah, I'm just trying. Right, exactly. No, I am. I'm trying to kickstart it, where we're if those people who were complaining, there's nothing new, there's nothing going on, it's not exciting. Well, there's something that's already happening. I'm not inventing anything. There's something that's already happening. You see in several nightclubs or anything, they have like futurism night and this and with the robots and all that, and it's there. The seed, it's just like how goth started with just the seed between glam and post-punk. The seed is there. The people are already doing it. It's basically the philosophy behind xenogoth is basically taking goth culture, not changing it, but just taking those elements from it that we all know and love, and then applying it to the darker side of science fiction and science fantasy, and then also incorporating cosplay into it. Again, cosplay, like goth and steampunk, a lot of do-it-yourselfers. And basically the joy of, getting dressed up and, having a good time. So that's where I spent like a month trying to coin a term. I was like, goths in space, or sci-fi goth, and all these weird terms. And I talked to a lot of people, a lot of friends, and one day, I don't know, it just hit me out of the blue. It just, xenomorph, xenophobia, xenophilia, xenogoth. It just kind of rolls off the tongue. Yeah. And the term was always there. And I'm not making any money off of this. It's just, I just want to be able to, in a way, I'm creating another label. I am. But it's just kind of like a loose term of saying we're bringing future and like science fiction and alien-ish extraterrestrial aesthetic into the goth scene, just kind of incorporating it, much like the cyberpunk. I know you want to ask about that, like the cyberpunk, and it's basically otherworldly, and bringing that into the goth scene, because again, the clues are all there. You look at H.G. Giger's work, you look at the Borg from Star Trek. You look at any of these very popular science fiction works of art or literature, or TV shows. They all have that dark side, and I think that the goth culture could kind of tap more into it and have fun with it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, so what? Okay, well, let me ask this then regarding music. Is that a consideration, or is it are you kind of grabbing existing genres like that are more electronic focused, or is it not even related to that?
Music is a very fluid and ambiguous subject when it comes to this, but I would on my xenogoth.com website, I created a video that basically it appeals the first contact, as it were, that was made in May 5th. May 5th, yeah.
Right.
May the 5th, no, May 4th. May the 4th be with you. I did it on May 4th. Basically appeals to fashion designers, musicians, DJs, anybody that's creative, do-it-yourselfers, and the goth populace in general. And I want them just to have an idea of what xenogoth is and be inspired by that. I'm not dictating what is xenogoth. I want it to create itself. As far as music goes, that's a really good question. I've reached out to several DJs in my neck of the woods, and they're excited by it. I kind of am like telling them, listen, if you took like industrial music and put like a darker slant on it, go with that, see if it sticks. Last week, I actually reached out to the creators of, I don't know if you remember, The Art of Noise.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
They're excited because they re-released a remastered version of their songs from the 80s, which I love. I was so obsessed with The Art of Noise growing up. Their sound was just, for me, early industrial. I mean, they were using chainsaws and and clanking things. So I reached out to them. I'm still waiting word. And again, I'm not telling them what to do. I'm saying, hey, this is out there. If you're inspired by it, if you want to expand on it, do it. And I'm just putting out a phrase. I'm just putting out one word, and I want people to kind of make it their own. And inspired by stuff like Alien, Star Wars, Star Trek, and what have you. And also, I'm also talking to like clothing designers and stores, like clothing stores that already can use their own merchandise, and to create a new style. For example, my biggest example is Gothic Renaissance store here in New York City.
Oh yeah, I've heard of them.
They already have. It's already there. Like the clothing's, all that's already there. All you have to do is put some of their clothes to that, and which they're doing. They're putting up like a catalog as we speak of of elements, and then you just throw in a lightsaber. There you go. Xenogoth. What it is trying to put an evolutionary seed out there and saying, listen, if you want to be part of that, if you like science fiction, if that's your thing, the whole nerdy science fiction cosplay thing, that's hot right now. It's a big thing. And I'm not trying to say it as a marketer. I'm just saying, listen, it's got to be a next step. There's got to be something. We're in the future right now. It's 2017. We talk on our smartphones like it was the tricorder.
Yeah.
We have, like, it's almost a dystopian future. I mean, it's almost like Blade Runner. I'm not going to get into politics, but
it basically is.
It is. If you really take a look at it, I could walk out from my restaurant right here, which is in Midtown West Side, and I walk 2 blocks over to Times Square, and on a rainy day, you would, outside of the flying cop cars, you would swear it's Blade Runner. You would swear it is. It's here. The future is here. But now goths, and then now goths are like, well, everything's stagnant. It's always the same thing. And it's like, well, hey, here's something new. Why don't you run with that? And that's basically the philosophy of xenogoth. It's bringing it to the future because the future is already here.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you know, but I think some of those people just only want to complain, so they're not going to care.
Yeah, sure. No, but then that's why we have trad goth that comes up, again, I don't find the only thing with trad goth is, like, again, it just paints too big of a stroke. Xenogoth is a big stroke too, only because it's not defined yet, and I'm not defining it. I'm just coining a word.
Right.
And again, yes, I am creating a label. I am, and it's not taking away from cyberpunk or cybergoth. I know that's a question you wanted to get into.
We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you just quickly about the music. I don't know if you did have a chance to check it out, but that the link I sent you about what was her name, Borg Queen, and she had the album Sex, Drugs, and Shiny Brass Poles.
Yes.
I saw that article and I was like, oh my God, this is to me, this smacked of xenogoth. And I had to send that to you. It's kind of like an industrial electronica goth cyborg sound aesthetic thing, and I was like, this is just completely unrelated to what you're doing, and just happened to pop up.
No, but it's perfect.
Crazy.
It's perfect, and if that artist is willing to identify and say, hey, this is a xenogoth sound or something like that, then make your own. I mean, it's again totally up to the artist or the fashion designers, and again, it's not always about fashion and music. It's there's literature. I mean, there's science fiction literature. There's movies. It's again culture. A lot of people tend to think of culture as like being very finite, but there's everything from art to dance to literature to music, fashion, visual media. It's very, very broad, and within that, a lot of people try to label things. This is just kind of a new. It's not so much a label as much as it's a pathway to just kickstart. After 40 years of just goth, to kind of say, hey, this is just something to add to the pile.
Yeah. It's interesting because they're thinking about how goth kind of, in relation to the next question about goth cannibalizing history and having this relationship with old art and old literature and stuff like that, it is interesting to think about how there never really has been an appropriation so much as what you're suggesting when it comes to science fiction stuff, which I hadn't really considered before this moment. But there is a plethora of dark science fiction that has had some kind of existed on the fringes, but never gained the popularity to the point where you would have someone writing an article saying romantic goth is its own thing. So in regards to that discussion that goth kind of has with the past, you use the label the next evolution of goth. Is that are you suggesting we try to move past that relationship, or are we just taking different pieces of history?
No. What I'm suggesting is that we don't move past it. We incorporate the past, and then we still, if you want to be quote unquote trad goth or classic goth or romantic goth or Victorian, you can definitely this is just something new, just something different, just something else. When the steampunk scene came about and we share things, and I also kind of call steam goths as steampunks that are going to a funeral. So there's aesthetics that blend there. And it's not. It's again. There's a lot of people who would criticize me and saying, "Oh, well, you're just trying to reinvent the wheel." I'm not. I'm actually just adding another spoke to the wheel, so that the wheel is a little bit more structured. It's just a new look, a new feel, a new style. For example, I know this friend. I just saw him at a party last night, and he always comes to this party. This one cool guy. He comes to a party with like this thing that he made himself. It's like a cyborg arm with LED lights and everything. It's insane, Yeah. And he made it himself, and he's like, he's African American, not really goth. He's got this cool arm thing. It's his thing, and I'm like, you fit into exactly what I'm trying to do. It's you could listen. The word xeno means alien or strange. And it's literally like you look at the dictionary.
So it's kind of like goth.
Goth, exactly. No, exactly my point. It's like it's like stranger than strange. So it's just logical. It's just a logical step. It's it's just a way to just to propel it forward, and to have another flavor added to the entire goth scene.
Right.
As opposed.
Well, regarding that, I think all three of us are probably pretty out of touch with what the kids are doing these days, maybe. Yeah. We are going to do a show this year about baby bats and actually talk to some people who are new in the scene. But when it comes to, we talked a little bit about difficulties with the scene and there not being stuff for younger kids to get into. Was that a consideration as far as trying to incorporate some of that culture from the youth, because I mean that's in general, historically at least, that's how goth has kind of evolved. You have the kids coming up and their own cultural all the stuff that they've got going on, coming into goth and bringing a little piece of that and trying to make it their own, and some of that gets thrown out and some of that gets incorporated. But was that a consideration for people that are younger, I don't know what age, 16, 17, whatever generation, I don't know what they're calling them now, but were you trying to appeal to that or bring some of that into it?
I was not directly appealing to that. I think that it would it falls into it. Listen, when I was 17, 18, I was known as a club kid back in the 80s, late 80s. Right. It was the whole club kid scene. I shouldn't have been in nightclubs. I was way too young, but that was where the whole club scene was at, and that's how I knew that's how I learned how to promote and see what like club life was like and such. And but now that's gone. That's another era. Kids, baby bats, or whatever you want to call them today, have no options. I mean, very few options. Listen, you have a 17, 18-year-old, what are they going to look forward to? Like the prom at their high school, and then now there's like, goth proms that pop up, and that's great. But still, I was even thinking about, hey, creating some parties like there used to be, like parties where there was no alcohol and it was under 20, under 21. There was like these juice kind of nightclub nights back in the 80s that happened. But nowadays, you would have to have a ridiculous amount of security guards to make sure that kids are not being like molested or not doing like bringing in their own alcohol or their own drugs or something. Right. It's just the logistics of it is just incredible. So nobody's doing it, and the basic complaint I get from people under 21 or under 18 is there's nothing for them to do, so they just don't engage in the scene. It's for something that's back in the 70s and 80s used to be for 15, 16, 17-year-olds. Now it's inaccessible. Yeah. Right. And with xenogoth, so indirectly, it kind of fills in a little bit of a void, only because this can be something that can be part of, like, again, if you're at Comic-Con and you have like a set of like xenogoths that group together, and they're all one's dressed as, I don't know, a big inspiration for me for xenogoth is Asajj Ventress from the Star Wars series.
Is that from the?
It's from the cartoon, the animated.
Okay, I haven't seen
the animated ones. Asajj Ventress, and she is very well. A lot of the dark side characters from the I believe the Clone Wars series, they are they're very gothic in style, like. Even like their makeup, the whole thing, and that was a very big inspiration. That was kind of like an aha moment for me when I was watching that series, and it kind of went from there. So I mean, younger people that are watching things like the Star Wars series and on TV and such, if they identify with those characters, then they would identify, with some of the things that we're working on here with xenogoth.
It's just
there's
a big crossover there too, but with ages, with the age range of who watch it, because I'll watch that kind of stuff with my 4-year-old son even, and we'll both enjoy it. So,
well, there was in Clone Wars, there was several instances where they get pretty brutal. I mean, as far as like the violence and the the death and the lightsabers through the heart thing, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, I don't know if I would
I'm a bad parent, so my son sees things he shouldn't.
There you go.
But CPS, no one call CPS, please. He's fine. He's perfectly fine. Well, let's see. Where do I want to go from here? I mean, we could talk. Let's kind of put our psychic hats on here, and I'm interested in both of your opinions on this. As far as, since we're talking about the phrase here is the next evolution of goth, apart from xenogoth, just kind of the last, I don't know, 5-10 years, how do you what do you predict as the trajectory goth is going in? I mean, I think the two main camps are that there's the fear that goth is either not willing enough to change, or on the other hand, it's too willing to change, so it doesn't mean anything anymore, kind of the postmodern thing. I mean, what do you guys think? Are we being too flexible, not flexible enough? Do you see a goth hitting a new stride like it did in the 90s and kind of blowing up, or is it just kind of a gradual decline from here, or stay the same, I guess?
I think, I think things are too splintered right now. I think there is a pretty strong degree of inflexibility, and I think the key is balance. I mean, I do want that wheel to keep turning. I do want the scene to stay alive, but you have to not only respect the past, but incorporate the past while also looking at the future and, placing some new concepts alongside it. And if it meshes well with it, great. If it doesn't, then fine. Just talking about, the xenogoth project, it kind of seems like, you're not trying to change things. You're just trying to take things and place it alongside something else and see if it kind of blends together and creates kind of a new aesthetic, or at least, that's how I'm kind of interpreting things. And, I think that's great, and I think it could kind of provide a much needed spark to the scene, or, it could fizzle out and not work, but, you can't know until we try,
No, and I agree. And what I've seen personally, and from what I've gathered from, friends, especially, I have a good friend of mine, DJ Patrick, here in New York City, and he's been a DJ, one of the longest running goth DJs in New York City since 1984, and just like Lady Scary Sarah.
Sarah, yeah.
Yes, out in, that's going to be 29 years of that party coming up soon. So I'd like to pick their brains about it. And what DJ Patrick once told me was that the goth scene, again, in New York City, and especially around 9/11 and all that, it becomes like a roller coaster. There's ups and downs. There's influx and there's outflux. People tend to, and it depends. It depends on the. It depends on the collective mood of the populace, or either the mainstream or off stream. There's just it depends on just the collective mood. After he was telling me that after 9/11 there was a lull in the goth scene, but after 9/11 there was kind of an influx between 2003 2000. I've started doing my website in 2007, right? So again, there's ups and downs, hills and valleys, and there's no way of really predicting it, but it's like the stock market. It's all cyclical. It comes around.
Exactly.
Or like you said, Mark, either that or it fizzles out. And if it fizzles out, then then so be it. But that's why with xenogoth, it's just kind of putting something out there and seeing if it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It's no skin off my back. I printed out a couple of cards, and I send out some invites on Facebook and made a video recording, and I'm going to do a big party and fashion show in October. But other than that, it's just putting something out there that people could either grasp onto or just dismiss, to each their own. And I think that's part what the goth scene is. It's either it gravitates towards something and incorporates it, or it just dismisses it.
Well, let's I was going to talk about that a little bit, but actually let's because I don't think we were recording earlier. So why don't you tell a little bit about the party that you have coming up in October, a bit about the night and what's going on with that and where it's going and all that stuff.
Well, in October, it's still in the planning stages. I'm still, again, over the summer, my main goal for Xenogoth is to inspire DJs, musicians, fashion designers, clothing stores that are goth clothing stores, and individuals to kind of create or help form this look inspired by science fiction, literature, and media. And so over the summer, this is what I'm cultivating. There's a series of unveilings. The first one, which was on May the 4th. Then that was First Contact. Then the arrival, what I like to call the arrival, would be the first week of October, which coincides with New York Comic-Con.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of parties that happen around Comic-Con.
Right.
So we're going to try... And then Comic-Con, the New York City Comic-Con, they feature those parties. They say, hey, this is going on,
nice. Okay.
cosplays to that. So we're going to try to be on that bandwagon. And
that's a good idea.
Yeah, so, and then at the same time, I'm getting, again, like with Gothic Renaissance, they're going to be piecing some looks together. I'm trying to see about getting some fashion designers to also be part of and get models to do like a runway show.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so we're going to do like a runway show, get some DJs that I'm saying right now, it's like try to come up with that xenogoth sound, like what you think is, and then we'll try it out, and again, it's just a testing platform. Anything goes. It's a community thing. It's not like, hey, you're gonna look like this right now and that's the way it goes from here on end. I'm not the type of person. Right, it's basically throwing out an idea, and if people want to absorb it, then they can. And what I'm also trying to do across the country with this network, like I said, with newgothcity.com, this network on that same weekend, I believe, which is the 7th of October, I'm trying to get collectively all of my promoter friends to do their own sci-fi xenogoth theme parties that same night.
Nice.
So, and then we're probably going to try to do some live streaming of like the fashion show will be live streamed on Facebook and such, and we'll try to see if we can be like a big collective. Hence where the technology comes in.
Yeah, taking advantage of some of the tech we have now. The exterminate, annihilate, destroy popped into my head when you were talking about music there, because I heard that the other night actually. Because Marcus, I was listening to your DJ mix at my party last night.
Yeah, my anniversary show.
So, well, I guess we could talk about cybergoth a little bit, but I actually want to read this. There's a paper by Isabella Van Elfren called, it's something exploring the cybergothic. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. I can't remember the exact title, but it's from a few years ago, but she uses the cybergoth label as her main focus, but I think reading through it I think it could apply to what you're trying to do here. So I pulled just the last paragraph of the conclusion out to kind of get an idea of where she's going, and then we'll go from there. So she says, the uncanny and desolate space of technological transcendency is explored with as much wonder as trepidation, and almost every endeavor to appropriate it leads to an encounter with the ghost of material dualism. It is our own fear, our own fascination that we look in the face, and thereby a new manifestation of Gothic spectrality has evolved that negotiates the shadow sides of technoculture. Cybergothic subculture self-consciously enters the virtual labyrinth between information and materiality, dancing their biological golem bodies to techno-sensual music. Cybergoths roam Siberia's liminal space and enact its uncanny ambivalence without ever taking sides. So I thought, like, from my perspective, that's a really idealized version of cybergoth as it stands today.
Extremely.
The kind of, but the idea there is this marriage between the intangible virtual reality space and the biological reality space that we inhabit. So I thought, I don't know, if it seemed to me like this could kind of be an ideal for xenogoth, and if you want to take it to a philosophical level and kind of explore that area, I think there's a lot to kind of chew on there.
There's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot to chew on. So I'm just going to simplify it right now with because I've been asked this question quite a bit. Well, it's like, cybergoth is, xenogoth, cybergoth. If I could put it the most simplest terms possible, xenogoth is to Tron what... I'm sorry. Cybergoth is to Tron what xenogoth is to Star Wars. Xenogoth is more like... anything goes, kind of. There's as long as it's dark, as long as there's diversity in that. Cyberpunk is more technologically based. It's more like living within circuitry and circuit boards and such.
Right.
Whereas xenogoth is more is in fact more biological.
Okay. So it's not about like becoming a cyborg kind of thing.
No, not at all. No, not at all.
Okay.
That is cybergoth. That is cyberpunk. That is that is becoming one with the circuits.
Right.
That is that. This is this is more just like it's alien life forms that are basically. Listen, if you had how can I put this? You're a Vulcan, but you're a goth. You know what I'm saying? So So if Spock was a goth, and probably would be, so that's xenogoth. That's or if like with Alien or Alien Covenant or that whole again H.G. Giger. It's all about biomechanical. It's all about, like, for example, the fashions. It's about ribbing. It's about it's skeletal in a way, but it's not circuitry or neon based. It's not there's no electricity to it. It's more just like a biological alien world.
Yeah.
So I make
I get it. Yeah.
That's where the difference is, because a lot of people are very confused at this point. When I just threw out cards saying xenogoth, it's coming soon, and people are like, "What the hell is this?" And I kind of took that from when I was growing up. I remember back in. When I was 12, I'm dating myself, when Ghostbusters came out. There used to be this ad campaign at the back of the buses of every bus in New York City. There was just the logo of the ghost with the slash tag thing. And people were, what the fuck does that mean? Like for months. It was like, what the hell does that mean? No ghost, no, I don't know, KKK member. It was just like, people had no idea what the hell that meant. And then when Ghostbusters came out, it was just like, oh my God, no ghosts and the whole thing. So I always love like a mystery campaign, as I call it.
I do also,
So I tried it with this, and it's just xenogoth, and again, it's just throwing the word out there and then having people use their own imagination as to what it means. And I started the xenogoth group on Facebook, and people have to ask me to join in and such, and I just let the conversations go, and people are like, well, what does it mean? Is it Xeno, so alien, so it launches on May the 4th, so, and that's it. I just want people's imaginations to keep going. But getting back to the question, with the cyberpunk and cybergoth issue, a lot of people started making instant correlation to it. And again, cyberpunk and cybergoth is more electrical, it's more circuitry board, it's more technological. This is more outwardly biological.
Right. Yeah, and I will say for the Facebook group, because I'm in there, I did, I've seen people posting some things, and sometimes I'm like, I don't know if that's necessarily where the kind of thing that we're talking about here. But to your credit, and it's difficult to do when you're trying to create something, you have been kind of hands off and just letting people kind of figure it out themselves, and that is commendable, I think. So
that's what I want to do. I just want people's brains to start working, or how they can contribute to that, just using a notion, just using a word, or an idea, and I hope that that's how the origins of goth even kind of started, in a way, and it became a collective effort, and not to be like saying, it's like the Borg, but it becomes a collective effort, and that's where I want to kind of run with it. I'm just dropping a name and they see where it goes.
Yeah, resistance is futile.
Exactly. Eventually, yeah.
Let's see. Well, I guess this is kind of, the rest of this is kind of off topic. So I think that's pretty good. I think we kind of got an idea where you're coming from and the vision and where it's going, and it's certainly interesting. It's certainly, I can't say I'm totally on board with it, but I'm definitely intrigued, and I appreciate what you're doing. And
it's growing. So even I don't know where the hell this is going to go. No, I don't. Do I want everybody to show up at a party dressed like Darth Vader tomorrow and call that goth? No. But there are people who are already doing that. There are, again, on the xenogoth.com website, it's still just the video right now, and eventually during the summer I'm going to start creating there's going to be inspirational, like images, what I'm trying to get people to be inspired from. There'll be a style guide. It's kind of just basically a guide of saying, hey, if you a color palette, black, green, red. It's just basically hints and clues, and then there'll be different just different parties that'll pop up here and there. For example, I have a good friend of mine, Alani. She does this party up in Cambridge called Ex Mortis once a month, and I'm meeting her tonight actually at my party, and she's doing a whole kind of science fiction night in 2 weeks, I believe. And then again, it's getting these promoters to be on board, and just instead of calling it like science fiction future night, just be like, hey, it's called xenogoth. It's just it rolls off the tongue easily enough. Again, it's not creating a subculture so much as just coining a phrase, coining a word.
So let's close with this. That there's a lot of different things we could talk about, but due to time and since we're on a schedule here, let me kind of ask one last question in regards to what you just said and how you kind of view the difference here between what xenogoth is and can be and other things that have popped up recently or in the last 5 years that kind of in a way want to do at least the same thing, and those being health goth, pastel goth, new goth, that kind of stuff. What's kind of how do you differentiate it there? Because everybody hates those. Well, not everybody hates those. But most people think it's trash. Yeah.
Yeah, those were weird. Those were, I thought, just an online prank at that point.
Yeah.
I have a good friend who I sometimes co-host parties with, Archangel, and he's a DJ, and he's this buff guy. He has his own, dietary supplement vitamin shop, and he's all about working out and everything. And then one day he's like, wait a minute, they're calling me health goth all of a sudden? And I'm just like, let it go. But, and we had a great laugh about that. But then again, those things are, again, I think, in my opinion, mainstream media trying to chip away into the goth scene, the goth culture, kind of the same way we were discussing about, Japanese J-goth. It's kind of a way of like saying, hey, I'm kind of goth too, but I'm,
without
I'm
the
this
commitment,
way.
without the danger.
Exactly.
Kind of
like, it's like, okay, you work out in like a black workout outfit. That makes you health goth. I don't even know. But
I saw a thing in one of these health goth videos where they were kind of trying to appropriate that goth or nerd thing, where they were like, we were the kids that nobody liked, and we were kind of rejected, and now we have our own community. But then I'm looking at it and I'm saying, you're a bunch of like good-looking hipster kind of people wearing fashionable clothing, doing working out in a gym. How is that not mainstream? How is that we're the ones that people pick on? You're super hip. What the fuck are you talking about?
No, and then you know what, that really, and it comes back full circle what we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, is that the word goth itself, which came to describe a type of architecture by this architectural critic called the new type of the new type of Gothic churches and all that. And using the word goth as it meaning, something that's beneath, it's something savage. It's something barbaric coming from the, the old goths. And I could give a whole history lesson here, but the word goth itself just means savage and, out of the norm and, macabre and just different. So if people want to just slap on the suffix of goth onto anything, and that means like, oh, we're like, like you could say like, oh, we're Britney Spears goth, it just because we want to be different, we want to,
exactly.
But no, and that's like a label where again you have to earn that quote unquote label.
That's
you have
that's
to earn
frustrating.
it, and it's a lifestyle. Again, it's a state of mind, then a state of being. It's not just like, oh, well, I feel dark today, and I'm gonna be, I'm gonna be this type of goth, or no. You have to own it, and you have to live it and be it. Basically, what like they say it in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Be it. You have to live it, be it. This is what it is. It's not just a fantasy.
It's like I might piss some people off, but some of it's kind of like like upper middle class kids that want to feel like they're special because everything is all the same and they're disillusioned, but they only want to feel special up until they start to get shit for it. You know, it's when you are that thing, when you embody it, when it is a lifestyle, it's, you know, so like for an example, my wife and I, we moved to a new townhouse about 5 months ago, and there's a Target down the street. And we do some shopping at Target every week, and we went there and we didn't have a good experience. We got kind of, you know, we got looked at, we got some comments and stuff like that. And it's this we actually drive now 40 or 30 minutes out of our way to go to the old Target just because it's a safe place where people know us because we've been going there for a while and we don't get heckled. But it's not a thing where I'm like, well, I'm just going to change, you know, so people like me more and I don't get yelled at. People aren't cursing at me in front of my son and telling me I'm evil and that kind of thing, because it's who I am. And when you take that and you try and appropriate that word that has such history and meaning and blood, sweat, and tears behind it, just to kind of give yourself some legitimacy when you look like a, you know, Katy Perry. That it pisses me off, and I think it should piss people off.
Rightfully so.
All right, thanks, William. Thank you so much for coming on. Why don't you let us know again where your website people can find you and where they can see your events and all that cool stuff coming up.
Yeah, just it's simple. It's newgothcity.com. I tell people all the time it's like newyorkcity.com, but we replaced York with Goth, and again, it's growing. I'm starting it from scratch, and if anybody has any friends or promoters or knows of any cool stores, I will just list it for free. It's just a information hub. The only thing I'm just an information booth, and I love doing it, and I love trying to get people to connect with other things, and it's what I do. As for xenogoth, I do have xenogoth.com. That's also going to be evolving during the summer. And, you know, love it or hate it or whatever. It's just, I don't know, something different, something new.
Yeah.
You know.
I think probably the Facebook group would be the best way to keep up with if anyone's interested in what's going on with that, too.
Yeah, and then on xenogoth.com, there's a logo. It says join us, and that goes right to the group.
Okay, cool.
And
Sweet.
I accept everybody, even though you have to ask for permission. I don't know.
All right. Well, William, thanks again. It was really fun hanging out. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, I'd like to do this again. This is actually, for my first podcast, this was actually a lot of fun. The time flew by. Now I have to get ready for my party downtown.
Yeah.
I got lightsabers and lights and fog machines are ready and all that.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So you've got to be interested in death. It's the last great taboo. It's the only taboo left.
Precisely. I mean, why is it, do you think, that everyone in here is dressed in black? It's a celebration of death.
No, I just like the clothes.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the clothes look good. Yeah, I mean, death looks good. Charles Manson, yeah? No, he was cool.
Don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm actually a vampire.
Sinister Suggestions.
Well, it's been a long time since I've recommended a book, and so that's exactly what I'm going to do this month for Sinister Suggestions. The book I'm recommending is one I just finished reading, and it is called Gothic Dark Glamour. And this book is written by Valerie Steele and Jennifer Park, both of whom work at the Fashion Institute of Technology. And, you know, since we talked a lot about fashion and aesthetic and what those represent and what they mean in this episode, I thought this book would be apropos as a recommendation. And it's basically split into two parts. The first part of this book, which is probably 2/3 worth, is essentially goes through and talks about the aesthetic of the Gothic from what we touched on earlier, the Romanticism, the Gothic literature, the Gothic architecture, the sort of Victorian era mourning clothing, all the history way back in time up until the current day and the goth subculture. And it goes through, and it's essentially a fashion book. These are two people who really know their fashion history when it comes to high fashion, runway shows, designers, and how those expressions in clothing relate to art, paintings, architecture, that type of thing. It was really interesting for me to read because high fashion and just fashion in general really aren't my forte. I'm certainly interested in goth aesthetics when it comes to clothing, but I don't know too much about the designers, about how all of that is interpreted and inspired. So getting the kind of professional view on the gothic look and where that came from and how it's influenced mainstream fashion and pop culture and subculture was interesting. They reference a lot of experts in various fields. You know, something I'm a big proponent of is listening to experts in their field, and these two certainly know what they are talking about. The second half of the book, or the last third, is more focused on the history of goth culture itself. So they go through kind of the early bands. There's a lot of music history there, and a lot of in-depth discussion of the early days of goth, the late 70s and early 80s. So even if you're not into the fashion so much, there's a lot of good information at the end of the book. And even in that part of the book, they really dive into the fashion of people like Susie, of people like Alien Sex Fiend and the Batcave, and what draw comparisons between their fashion and runway fashion in the future and gothic, the gothic, as it were, in the past. They reference people like Catherine Spooner and other academics. So this really was a wonderful read. And on top of that, it's filled with really beautiful photographs. Oftentimes they'll go into detail of an outfit of a designer and how the designer chose those elements and what those elements mean and the history of those elements and the deconstruction, or the romanticism, or the philosophy of fashion that went into specific attires and specific time periods. And not only do you get all of that, then you get to actually see it. You get to look at the painting or the photo of the runway model, and it really adds so much more depth and meaning to the images that you're seeing. A lot of times, for me at least, when I look at those types of images, I can appreciate them for their aesthetic beauty, but I don't grasp the depth of history and of philosophy and of culture that are behind those photos and all of those things that have led up to this design, and even the context of any rivalries or political statements that have gone into that as well. There's photographs of art and of architecture and all the things that I've mentioned, and they're beautiful photos. So it's a fairly large book as well, so it even works well as kind of a coffee table book, something you can flip through and get inspiration from. So I highly recommend it. Again, this book is titled Gothic Dark Glamour. As I mentioned earlier in the show, we didn't get to finish with the second half of the article. One of the things I'm trying to work on for this show is to shorten it, because that's one of the biggest complaints I get from people who don't listen, is that it's just too long. Moving forward into the future, we're actually looking at splitting the show into 2 episodes, but that's a ways off. So for those of you who are fans of the show and who do want the extra content and want to hear more of a discussion around these subcategories, what I'm going to be doing, as I mentioned, is diving into the second half of that article. I'm going to try and get a guest on as well to just kind of hash it out and discuss it, get another opinion. And we're going to do that on the Patreon page. So you can get another, I'm guessing it'll probably be about another hour worth of content this month relating to this show. If you go to patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions, I'll probably be publishing it about a week or maybe 2 weeks after this episode airs. If you are also looking for video content, besides the stuff that I've been posting on the Cemetery Confessions YouTube channel, we do have a YouTube channel now. You can listen to the show there, and you can listen to me talk about various other goth-related topics. Signing up for the Patreon, starting at only $1 a month, will get you access to the last, almost 2 years worth of content that I've posted there. And of course, as I mentioned previously, we are getting closer to the goal that will allow us to give out prizes and some other cool things like Patreon hangouts. So if you're looking for more content, if you're looking for a community of people, check out patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions to see what kind of rewards you can get. Next month, we are going to be having on 2 guests, and we're going to be talking about, at least for the main portion of the show, what it's like to be transgender in goth culture. We're going to be touching on the sociological aspects of that. We're also going to be talking about the hard science, and we're going to be mainly getting their experiences, their stories of being trans in mainstream culture and goth culture. We're going to be talking about a lot of other stuff as well. And it's going to be a really fun show. Those are, they're 2 friends of mine. One of them is a loyal Patreon member, and one of them is a musician and author as well. So thanks for hanging out with us again this month. As I said, if you would like more, go ahead and head over to the Patreon page for Cemetery Confessions. Otherwise, until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.